Hello, friends, and welcome to the show. So, this episode is kind of a follow up to an episode I did pretty much 1 month ago when I said Chauvin's gonna walk. And I believe Chauvin's gonna walk. I believe Minneapolis is gonna burn to the ground. I believe that last year was just a trial run for what's going to happen here in about a month because Chauvin's gonna walk, guys. And I'll tell you why here in a second. But before we get started, how about you smash that like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and leave a comment down below because it helps with the algorithm. Let's get started from Jack Posobiec. Yesterday, George Floyd's passenger Maurice Hall pled the fifth after originally saying he would be George Floyd's voice. Today, Floyd's girlfriend just testified he was their drug dealer. This is extremely important, and I'll explain why here in a couple minutes. But he doesn't want to incriminate himself because if he was, in fact, George Floyd's drug dealer, if he was the person who gave George Floyd those drugs that he had in his system, and if there's a plausible link, a causal link between those drugs and Floyd's death, not just the knee on the neck, but you could say it's more likely that the drugs killed him than the knee on the neck, then Mr. Hall would be on the hook for third-degree murder. And that's why he is now pleading the fifth. That's why he is no longer going to be the voice for George Floyd because he is selfish, because he's a criminal. Jumping over to the next one from Robert Gruler. Courtney Ross, Floyd's girlfriend, describes previously buying drugs from Maurice Hall, the man with George Floyd, on May 25th, 2020. I'm not going to show you this full clip, but it's extremely important that they buy, that he's their drug dealer. This is extremely important. And he is seen passing stuff to George Floyd in the shopping center. Charles McMillan, who tried to speak to George Floyd as officers first tried to put him in a police car, and then later as Floyd shouted for his mama while Derek Chauvin kneeled at his neck, just broke down on the witness stand. Court on a break now. So basically he was saying, I saw this man crying for his mother, but it turns out George Floyd wasn't crying for his mother. It turns out that Chauvin trial breaking news. Mama was George Floyd's nickname for his drug sharing girlfriend. I don't like the editorializing on this. I don't like the victim blaming because, like it or not, being addicted to opiates is a victim. Like, they are victims of the pharmaceutical companies. They are victims of the predatory healthcare practices. They are victims of drug dealers like Maurice Hall. They are victims, but they are not the victims of the Minneapolis Police Department. Unless you can make a valid argument that all Minneapolis police officers need to be omnipotent and understand that, hey, this person swallowed drugs 5 minutes before I even showed up, and I had no idea that he swallowed drugs before I showed up to the scene because I'm supposed to know what's happening when I'm not even here. That's extremely important. People expected Chauvin to know what was going on before he was even there. And if his defense attorney does a good enough job, Chauvin, all you don't need to be proved not guilty. This is what people don't understand about law. You don't need to prove that you didn't do something. You just need to prove that, or you don't need to be here. The best way of doing this. You don't need to be proven innocent of anything, right? Chauvin doesn't need to be proven innocent of doing it. There just needs to be reasonable doubt that there's an other option, that he wasn't the person solely responsible. If there was reasonable doubt that he was the person solely responsible for the death of George Floyd, then he can't be charged with murder because it's not his fault. Now, if he was just a link in the chain in that perfect storm, well, that's hardly his fault at all. And the people who should be held responsible would be the city of Minneapolis, Maurice Hall, and George Floyd himself. George Floyd himself for having taken the drugs. I understand people that are addicted, you don't want to victim blame, but you got to lay the blame where the blame lies, right? So George Floyd for having taken the drugs, Maurice Hall for having sold him the drugs. The city of Minneapolis for teaching Derek Chauvin to put the knee on the neck. perfect storm, and now they're leaving him out to dry. And from Jack Posobiec, watch video where officer asks Floyd about foaming at the mouth. Floyd replies he was hooping earlier.
Right I'm not nothing, because you acting real erratic. Man, I'm scared, man. Let's go. God, you got foam around your mouth, too? Yes. Yes, I was just hooping earlier. Let's go.
So he claims he was hooping earlier. He claims he was playing basketball, and that's why he was foaming at the mouth. He was just dehydrated, guys. That's all it was. I was playing basketball. This is extremely important because, again, cops are not omnipotent. Nobody is omnipotent. So if you have somebody asking, hey, you're acting real weird, you're acting erratic, you're foaming at the mouth, they see signs of an overdose happening, and the person says, man, I'm not on drugs, I was just playing basketball, that's all it is, I'm just, hyped from having played basketball. They still call the ambulance, but guess what? They're going to be like, well, we're not sure if this is even an overdose. He claims he was playing basketball. Of course, there's a distinct possibility he could be lying, so they still call in the ambulance anyway. But if George Floyd lied, how can you lay the blame? Because plenty of people on Twitter are going, the cops should have known he's been overdosing. Well, if he lies about taking drugs, what's their responsibility at that point? From Tim Pool, Chauvin defense. Floyd had overdosed before, had stomach pains, foam on mouth. Defense states during arrest, Floyd had foam on mouth and said he had stomach pains. From Haley Miller, Nelson asked Ross whether she noticed foam coming from Floyd's mouth when she brought him to the hospital the night he overdosed on March 2020. She says yes. The defense has argued that Floyd died in part from a drug overdose. Floyd stated during his arrest that his stomach hurt, and witnesses have described seeing foam coming out of his mouth. So this is extremely important. So the last time George Floyd overdosed, which was 2 months before that incident where he passed away, he had stomach pain, he was foaming at the mouth. However, he was able to make it to a hospital in time and survived. This time, he was unable to do so because he lied to the police. He resisted arrest. If he would have told the cops, hey, I could be overdosing on drugs. Hey, I took a pill. I don't know what was in it. He could have just said that, right? I took a pill from somebody at the yard. I was playing hoops. I was hooping, man. I was at the yard. I was playing ball, and I twisted my ankle, and somebody gave me a pill. They said, hey, this will make you feel good. I paid him $5 for the pill, and now my stomach hurts. I'm foaming at the mouth, man. Please send me to the hospital because I don't want to overdose. Imagine how much different that situation would have played out. Imagine the billions of dollars of damage that would not have occurred because of George Floyd's selfishness, because he lied to the police, and his selfishness because he didn't want to get in trouble. If he would have said the right lie, he wouldn't have gotten in trouble at all. He could have just said some random person at the yard gave him a pill. Man, I don't know who it was. We're all wearing masks. This is COVID. That's all that had to happen. It's ridiculous. And what's important is, guys, this is from the American Addiction Centers. One of the most commonly described characteristics of fentanyl overdose was the rapid speed of onset, with 75% of the respondents describing symptoms of an overdose occurring within seconds to minutes. One respondent stated, I would say you notice a fentanyl overdose as soon as they are done injecting the fentanyl. They don't even have time to pull the needle out of their body, and they're on the ground. When asked to describe what happens during a fentanyl overdose, the most common responses were, okay, and remember all the things they said about George Floyd when he was on the ground. A person's lips immediately turning blue, a gurgling sound when breathing, stiffening of the body or seizure-like activity, foaming at the mouth, confusion or strange behavior before the person becomes unresponsive. So remember, he had methamphetamine and fentanyl in his system. So when the methamphetamine wore off and he orally took the fentanyl, which means it's going to metabolize slower in his system as opposed to intravenously injecting that into his body. Because when you do basically an injection of fentanyl, it's a hard hit because it goes directly into your bloodstream. When you take the pill, it needs to go through your liver. It takes more time. It's like taking an edible pop brownie, right? It takes a little bit of time to kick in. And this is important. George Floyd's lips turned blue, and his face turned blue. So, boom, check mark. Gurgling sounds with breathing. He was struggling with breathing. Check mark. Stiffening of the body or seizure-like activity. He was twitching and having seizure-like activity at the very end, right before as soon as he went comatose, he started having seizures. So check mark. Foaming at the mouth. Check mark. Confusion or strange behavior before the person becomes unresponsive. Check mark. Because even the police noticed that he was acting erratically. He was 5 for 5 based on the American Addiction Center's basically checklist of what happens during an overdose, a person's reactions to fentanyl. This is extremely important. And finally, why is Maurice Hall crapping his pants right now? Because I covered this in my video last month, Minnesota's third degree, murder in the third degree. Whoever without intent to cause death proximately causes the death of a human being by directly or indirectly unlawfully selling, give away, bartering, delivering, exchanging, distributing, or administering a controlled substance classified in Schedule 1 or 2 is guilty of murder in the third degree and may be sentenced to imprisonment for not more than 25 years or to payment of a fine of not more than $40,000 or both. He knows if he sits in that seat and says, yes, I sold George Floyd those drugs, or yes, I exchanged those drugs with George Floyd, those illegal drugs that were in his system that led to his death, bing, bang, boom. Maurice Hall is now on the hook for third-degree murder and will find himself in some silver bracelets because, guys, the only person who has a viable case against them for third-degree murder is whoever sold George Floyd those drugs. Because guess what? The column A for third-degree murder, whoever without intent to affect the death of any person causes the death of another by perpetrating an act imminently dangerous to others and evincing of a depraved mind without regard for human life is guilty of murder in the third degree. So like I said in my video last month, guys, Chauvin was performing a police sanctioned tactic. He wasn't in depraved mind. When people are screaming around you when you're trying to control a scene, you're going to have tunnel vision. You're going to pay less attention to what you're doing and more attention to the crazy people screaming at you. You're going to be screaming at the failed MMA fighter calling you names because now he's a threat because he's fit. You don't know how he's going to act when people are screaming and cursing and shouting at you. You don't know if someone's going to pull out a gun and start shooting at you because you don't know what's going on. So guess what? You're going to start paying less attention to the person who's under your knee and more attention to the more immediate threat, which is going to be the crowd of people surrounding you. Because when you have 4 cops surrounded by 20 people screaming at them, guess how fast 4 cops can be beaten to death by 20 people? It's extremely fast. So, guys, I called it, and I highly suggest that you guys arm yourselves because you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what's going to happen with the Biden administration, if they're going to take away your Second Amendment right. You don't know if ammo is going to suddenly disappear off the shelves. So, stock up. I'm not saying that you need to prep, but I'm saying that you should be willing and able to defend your property. You should be willing and able to defend yourself and your family because this is important. And you don't know how people are going to react when Derek Chauvin walks because guess what? It looks like as every day passes, he's getting closer and closer to walking. So that's going to be it for now, friends, unless the world decides to burn and catch on fire during the weekend. I'll see y'all on Monday. Have a good one. Bye.